You know, one of the questions I want to address to you is when you look at kind of the dynamics of what's going on now, where you have these large-scale asset recoveries, but you don't have much in the way of the dispensation of justice. If you're looking at the corruption perception index, and you're looking at strength of institutions like the judiciary and the whole process of prosecution, don't you think that there has been some sort of letdown in terms of, even if you want to look at asset recovery, that these other areas have been so weak that it almost offsets? What are your thoughts about that?
Yes, I think Nigerians are failing to really comprehend and appreciate what the government is trying to do. We have a scenario where all the institutions were there before, in fact, the government came into being. We saw the large-scale corruption in the judiciary. We heard about it, although some have not been proven. I'm a legal practitioner. I practice in England, and I found myself coming into Nigeria, oftentimes appearing in court. And I found out that there was a lot of problems. Problems in terms of even the institutions themselves are not there. The judges are not well paid. The judges are not well given conditions of sitting. The litigants are not well prepared, to have the best justice, or are not in a position to receive the best or they could have in justice. A lot of things were all wrong. And the government came out with an outcry to say, listen, everything is wrong in this country, in the judiciary. How do we overhaul this?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, do you think that could have added to the perception? Because this is all about perception.
No, well,
do you think it could have added to the perception that the country is really corrupt?
Yes, like what I say to you, the perception of Transparency International has published does not reflect the reality on ground.
Okay, now I'm going to ask you, do you think is it any comfort to you that it looks like generally across the countries that have been reviewed, it looks like there was a really poor performance this year? Just a moment, that a lot of countries, I think about 2/3 of the countries reviewed scored under 50, and I think you're supposed to be scoring, the ideal mark is 100, and 2/3 of the countries surveyed, over 180 of them fell under 50. The average score this year was 43.
Well, I think one of the flaws I found in this is the consistency in the figures, one. Then secondly, there's no long trend in this. Each year they just come up and come out with these figures. And it's so easy for them to minus one or add one and come out with what they do. It does not reflect the reality. Any Nigerian who lives in this country would know the wave of awareness of the fight against corruption is very, very strong, and in the minds of Nigerians. For the first time, if you look at the definition of corruption itself, corruption is defined according to its own locality where it is perceived to be or exist. The Indian looks at corruption differently from what in Nigeria we call corruption. Before now, like and you will agree with me, Nigerians didn't see anything bad about being enticed to offer even public services and all of that. It was a common way of life in Nigeria. A lot of things.
Some people argue that it's still a common way of life. But let's quickly go to Lagos now. I think Nyota and Gimba have questions for you.
Yes, Mr. Austin Edame, my question goes to you. Did this CPI put into consideration the efforts of the anti-graft agencies, talking about the EFCC, the ICPC, even PACAC, in the fight against corruption, which is a pivotal point for this government? Did you put into consideration those agencies with a view to seeing that there has been some level of improvement from the figures recorded in 2016?
Okay, so my response to that would be that, okay, like for instance, yesterday we released a statement as the national contact of Transparency International, and we were able to within that statement identify that within the reporting period, that was 2017, the EFCC recorded an estimated 286 cases. And when you talk about the number of convictions that they've been able to have, you will see that there's been not much improvement. And why we say this is that in terms of politically exposed persons, how many politically exposed persons have actually been convicted? And unless and until when political exposed persons and high-grade corruption cases are being brought to conclusive ends, except when politically exposed persons are being taken to jail. That's until that then and then will you begin to see some appreciable amount of progress being made on the index. Then again, when you talk about even the EFCC that you mentioned, we want to also, of course, you know that up until now, there's still a back and forth as to the leadership. While I may not necessarily go into the politics of the leadership of that, in terms of the perception that may also inform on those that are dealing with the country, it will also affect how these people view the entire anti-corruption fight. In terms of the anti-corruption strategy, for instance, even for those that work as a thematic in terms of anti-corruption, beyond those that work on anti-corruption as a thematic, you may want to know that very few people actually are aware of the anti-corruption strategy. So until this anti-corruption strategy is made known, even at the grassroots level, until there is an action plan, a costed action plan, assigning responsibilities and roles for people to drive with the anti-corruption grant strategy, then and until then, we will begin to see the perception improved over time for those that are working on strictly on anti-corruption issues.
Because then again, let me follow up on that. Because what this government has been able to achieve to a certain extent, which has been lauded across board, is that they've been able to go after corrupt individuals, especially government officials, and seize assets and their properties. And in the process of prosecuting even some of them, you know. But one would say that perhaps this TICPI report is not really mindful of those actions that the government is taking in trying to encourage the war against corruption in Nigeria. How do you respond to that?
Okay, so I want to say that whenever we have this kind of conversation, the first narrative that we always jump on is the fact that, man, we are recovering assets. And we want to say that recovering assets and recovering money may not necessarily be just the entire anti-corruption strategy. Beyond the recovery of assets, how effective are those assets being managed? I make reference to Italy, for instance, where a very robust asset recovery mechanism has been in place, arising from the mafia era, where assets and monies were recovered from those that were fingered to be in the mafia then. So right now, over time, they've been able to have a mechanism in place that when assets are recovered, you have a tracking system that is being documented. You have a case management file officer that manages that kind of case, and the case is being documented and has a case file number, and it's there for everybody to see. But how, in terms of when you bring it back home, how robust has been the asset recovery and management system? Up until now, Gimba, we still don't have any lead agency to say that is heading the asset recovery fight. For instance, you have conflicting narratives that when you speak to different agencies, they tell you that they are the ones that are heading the asset recovery strategy of government. But in a situation whereby you have 2-3 agencies claiming to take the lead on asset recovery, then it then points to the fact that there is no comprehensive strategy to recover and manage assets.